worked.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Of course. I was just gonna send you the meeting ID again, but you got it, so I will get rid of that
Thank
email.
you. Awesome, awesome. It's always a little bit of a nervous time just before these seminars because you never know what is gonna work.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yesterday was very nerve-wracking, running Zoom logistics and stuff.
Well,
But
thank you for doing this,
of
and thank you
course.
for being there for responding immediately.
Yeah, of course. I wanted to make sure I was here 30 minutes before so I could get the live streaming going and the recording going because
Great.
sometimes that is tricky.
No, thank you. Great. Well, I'll start trying to change my background and all that good stuff. Wait, wait.
Awesome. I think my computer's too old for me to change the background. It doesn't let me,
And so,
unfortunately.
thank you. Oh, so Hari told me that I should speak for about 45 minutes, and
Mm-hmm.
so I have carefully timed it last night at midnight to 45 minutes. So I'm hoping that it'll be like 44 to 46 minutes, something like that.
Okay,
That it'll come out, and then I'll stop for questions and all that.
perfect. Yeah, so for the questions, I don't know if you'll have your screen shared, then I can help you moderate the chat. So I can help you moderate the questions. And then we'll do a 2 to 3 minute intro, just going over some Zoom logistics to make sure that people know to ask their questions in the chat or the Q&A. But that should cover up the whole hour, so that will be great.
Awesome. And I'll try and, unless it's like a really quick clarification question, I'll leave the discussion-oriented questions towards the end.
Okay.
Because otherwise I've noticed that, sort of the whole flow gets disrupted and then it's sort of hard for me to understand when to end it. Should I still end it in 45 minutes? Should I continue on for longer, etc.? So I'll just sort of time it, get it done, and then unless there's like something I can quickly see where it's a small thing like notation or something, then I can clarify that.
Okay, perfect. And I'll also give you a 1 minute warning but it won't be like too strict, you might go 46 minutes, that's okay. But I'll give you a 1 minute warning and then let you know that we should start
Thank you.
taking questions.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, and I guess, I'll start the last, winding down slide and all of that, you should be able to see. So hopefully that I'll hit exactly on time. But, it's always a little bit here and there, so we'll see.
Yeah, that will be good. We'll see how it goes. I'm sure the questions will be great. And then, yeah, so it's kind of interesting with webinars. So we have the panelists as all the participants, and then attendees only can access the Q&A box, which is weird. So I'll keep my eye on the chat, and if I see any specific questions relating to notation, I'll interject.
Thank you. Or something like that, right? So it's because I was in a seminar on Friday, and once I sort of opened the floodgates, there's so many, like people were just in the first part of the talk itself. They're like, "Did you think of this? Did you do this?" And then I realized that the whole talk got derailed.
Oh, I
It's like,
see.
I've only gone through 15 minutes of my presentation. I mean, they're all being nice and curious. I'm very, very grateful for that. It's just that I hadn't sort of realized that, okay, but they also have a limit on the other side, right, of 45, 50 minutes. And so if I take this, then I don't know, should I still end in the 45-minute mark or 50-minute mark, or should I go over now that we've answered all these questions in between? And so it's just sort of and in a live setting, I think you can sort of quickly ask the organizer, hey, should, or they can sort of start giving hand signals and stuff like that. And here it's just more difficult to quickly communicate.
Yeah, I was trying to find a timer feature to integrate into Zoom, but they don't have it yet, unfortunately.
That would be good, right? So then you don't have to kind of stop and say, how long do you think I should, all those sorts of things you can just do quick.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's okay. I'm sure.
No, it's perfectly fine. It's perfect. So let me do this. Can I try a screen share just to see if it
Oh
works?
yeah. I had to just change a setting, but I think that's good
Sure.
now.
So things have been good so far here.
I think the talks have been really good. In terms of the poster session, that didn't work via Zoom. So yesterday that was a little bit of a fire, but today we'll do it in Gathertown. But
That's great. That's
but
great.
yeah, other than that, it's been great.
That's thank you for all the work that you're putting in.
Of course. Awesome. You can
So
share
does
now.
this work?
Yeah.
Okay. So uh, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Advancing slides. Great.
Okay. Wonderful. I think that's okay. Stop sharing. All right.
Awesome. And
Awesome.
let me make sure I have it started for the live stream, so it did come up there too. It's like 3 minutes behind,
Okay.
or 2 minutes behind, but yeah, that's great.
Might
Awesome.
put some other background. Let me try to download. Let me try and see if I can come up with some other nicer background.
Yeah, I wonder if my computer will let me do that now. Let's see. Maybe my, oh yeah, maybe not. It's kind of funny now. Zoom has these video filters too,
Uh-huh.
where you can like put goofy hats and stuff on. It's
Oh, yes.
funny. I think Hari's also supposed to join shortly,
Okay.
but if not, that's okay. He'll come by start time. Oh man.
A lot of work you guys are doing.
I feel like organizing it via Zoom is a lot of a lot of logistics.
It
But
is.
yeah, it's really good experience to see all behind the scenes of how it's put together.
No, well, it's not easy. So thank you.
Hmm. Yeah, I went to one of the seminar talks at I think it's CRCS at Harvard.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I went to one of those a couple weeks ago with Professor Stefano Arman. That was
Yeah.
really cool. And I saw
Awesome.
that Andrew had it live streamed to YouTube, and I was like, Hari, we have to do this.
Thank you. Thank you.
You guys do a great job with that.
Yeah, no, he's been. So where are you at, Caitlin, in terms of your PhD?
I'm actually a senior in undergrad, so
Oh, I didn't even know that. Wow.
yeah, so I am applying to PhDs this fall.
Well, that's amazing then. You're putting in so much work. Congratulations. That's a lot. I
Thank you.
didn't realize. Well, I mean, really, this is a lot of work. And
Hmm.
thank you for all the work and the maturity with which you're handling all of these situations. So thank you.
Thanks.
So give me a minute. Let me get a glass of water and be ready. Okay.
Yeah, of
Thank you.
course, go for it. Hey, Hari.
Hi, Kathleen.
How's
Hi,
it going?
Millian.
Oh, he went to grab a drink of water.
Oh, I see. How is it going? All
It's
good?
good. Yeah, we tested out screen sharing and audio, so we are all good to go.
Perfect.
And I changed the settings so that all participants can share. So
Okay,
that's
you got it right.
Mm-hmm.
Can you make me the co-host?
Oh, yeah. And I also on Twitter added the live stream link.
Oh, great. You have been on it for some time.
I have been bombing Twitter with live stream links all day yesterday and today.
That's good.
So that's good. But did you get a good night's sleep?
Yeah, there is so much work.
Yes.
There's midterm next week, so for the course that I'm,
midterms are next week?
yeah, for the course I'm JSing, so I have to prepare the question set.
Mm-hmm.
And we are doing 2 midterms because people are in different time zones.
Oh.
And I am the head content GSI, so it's a little effort on me to coordinate with people so that both the midterms are done. That's something, yeah.
Wow.
Plus the professor is not stopping discussions and homeworks to happen during the midterm, so that also you have to make. So yeah, that's something. Plus I have some surgeries on Wednesday, so I am on little medication. Yeah, a lot of things. This thing will be over today, so
Yeah. Ooh. I think I got a good 9 hours of sleep, so that was nice. I was fleshing out the rest of my little presentation that I'll give. I think it came out pretty well. We'll see. See how it goes.
Have you taken a 10-minute or 5-minute slot?
5 minutes.
That'll be good.
Yeah, I think I've got it so that I can finish with like 15 seconds to go. So hopefully I finish that on time.
Hi, Millian.
I also went and resent everyone the Zoom invite, so they had it.
Can Millian hear us? Hi, Millian.
Oh, I think they're muted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome.
Hi, Millian.
Hi.
I don't think we have met. Hari. I am a PhD student at Berkeley.
Awesome. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh yeah, yes, our pleasure.
And thank you for organizing such a great symposium. It's a lot of work. I was just telling Caitlin, it's not easy.
It is, and yet some things go wrong, and yeah.
It's thank you. No, it's a good experience, I suppose.
It is.
That's good. So let me start my clock so I know how long I'm going. Oh, that's good.
So you said you'll also be talking about Google Research India. So how is it set up there? Like, is it the same way as it is here, like having residency programs and such?
Yes. And yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of openings. So pre-doc, postdoc, research scientists, visiting scientists, all kinds of things. Yeah, yeah. And we have, throughout the lab, but in AI for social good, also we have, internships, all sorts of things like that, which is the group that I head there. Yeah, so if you're interested, yeah, please think of applying. I'll make a pitch for it in the beginning of my presentation.
Yes, yes, yes. In fact, I think that's a really good opportunity for people who are at least people who are joining from India. It will be a great opportunity for them and people who are interested to. I think doing social good in India with AI comes with a lot of interesting challenges, with so many people and so many new challenges. So I think
Yes,
it will be a rewarding experience for anybody.
absolutely. Yeah, and there's a lot of excitement. It's a new lab, so there's a lot of new activities going on, and we are going to be starting a whole set of new projects on AI for social good across India, Africa, Southeast Asia.
Wow.
So yeah,
So when you say
yeah,
social good, what kind of big thrust? I think I'll see it in the presentation maybe.
yeah. Some of it you will see. I basically I'm trying to cover give a quick overview of a whole bunch of work, so I wouldn't be able to dig deep into the work in India, but public health and conservation, agriculture, those are the three big things that we are looking at.
I see. Oh, by the way, we mailed you, but then didn't get back about if you want to be in the panel discussion today.
I think if you don't mind, I'll skip it because I need to prepare for my class tomorrow. I
Ah,
haven't,
okay. No problem. Not a problem. Yeah.
I'm not ready yet. Yeah, and this Zoom thing is just like, yeah, day before yesterday, somebody told me, well, the equations on the slides, because normally I would write on the whiteboard, right, sum over blah blah blah. And I can't quite understand the sum. It's like the font is not big enough on the slides and all these kinds of things. And now I have to go back and check and make sure the fonts are big and this, all these things one wouldn't think of when writing on the board, right? Because you would just
Exactly. I mean, everything has become so different, and particularly for this event, at least, like thinking about doing some events which are more informal, like collaborathon, for example, in which we let people to talk to each other and form groups to collaborate in future. It was such a tough job because like you in Zoom there is a breakout feature, but you can't break out people randomly because people want to talk to some people that they think they will collaborate. So yeah, we had some hassle yesterday with that, but everything else has been good. Yesterday about the talk by Joshua Bengio, Tom Dietrich, and one of the tutorials, everything was at least good from our perspective.
That's wonderful. It is no doubt a lot of hard work. So really, thank you. It's an
Thank you.
important service you're doing to the community, for the community. Yeah. So it's 10:56. So should we? I guess. Is there any
um,
get going?
Yesterday, everyone piled in like exactly at 10:59. It was making me nervous. I was like, oh no. But hopefully, we can probably start sharing the slides. Sorry.
Whenever. Yeah, let me start the clock also, just so that.
yes, I'm trying to do that.
Okay, sure. And I sent a message in our little Slack channel going on. So
So, Milind, how is the response of the government of India in terms of all this AI, using AI for doing all this? Are they
Oh,
well
it's
supportive?
awesome. They had last week. meaning, you know, beginning of October or so, they had this raise, you know, responsible AI conference. They had Vaibhav, which is another another kind of scientific conference to allow for collaboration abroad. So they're really, really trying to push. It's very encouraging to see their
That
emphasis on
sounds
AI.
good.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it also in somehow connected to the Vadvani AI initiative?
Which one? Our lab in Google. Google funds Vadvani, but these are two separate. I mean, we collaborate. We are very good friends, but we are
Okay.
like two separate labs.
Oh, I see.
And you were mentioning earlier that you had internships in AI and social good. Is that
Yeah.
with the Google lab or with your lab at Harvard?
Both. So there's Circus has summer fellowships, and then Google Research India has internships.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. That's
Yeah, if we
awesome.
wanted to come to a more exotic location, Bangalore.
Well, the weather is nice. It's more close to US weather as compared to
That's true.
different
I,
parts of India.
Awesome.
I did my internship back in my third year undergrad in Bangalore.
oh, great.
Like the place, except the traffic.
Yeah, yeah. But food compensates for it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
11. Okay.
it's 11 and people are piling in and we have 5 people on the YouTube live right now, so that's awesome. I think, Hari, in the interest of time, we should get started and people can pile in.
Can we wait for like 2 minutes or something? I think this is the time most people join.
Okay. Let's wait a minute. Give it 30 seconds or so because we don't want to get too far behind. And we want to make sure that Milind will have the whole time to speak. So
yeah.
So I'll get started at 11:01 as people pile in. All right. All right. Hi, everyone that's here so far. Welcome back to day 2 of the Computational Sustainability Doctoral Consortium. We're going to start off with a keynote talk. And for participants that are here, remember to have your questions in the chat. And for any attendees in the audience, you can use the Q&A feature of the Zoom webinar. So to start off the keynote, we have Milind Tambi from Harvard University talking about AI for public health and conservation, learning and planning in the data to deployment pipeline. Milind Tambi is a Gordon McKay Professor of Computer Science and Director of Center for Research in Computation and Society at Harvard University. Concurrently, he is also Director of AI for Social Good at Google Research India. He is a recipient of the IJCAI John McCarthy Award, ACM SIG AI Autonomous Agents Research Award from AAMAS, AAAI Robert S. Englemore Memorial Lecture Award, Informs Wagner Prize, RIST Prize of the Military Operations Research Society, Christopher Columbus Fellowship Foundation, Homeland Security Award, AAMAS Influential Paper Award, Best Paper Awards at conferences including AAMAS, IJCAI, and IVA. He has also received meritorious commendations and letters of appreciation from the U.S. Coast Guard, Los Angeles Airport, and the U.S. Federal Air Marshal Service. Prof. Tambi is a fellow of AAI and ACM. And with that, let's have Milind Tambi take it away.
Thank you. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you for this wonderful introduction, and thank you all for attending. So since this is the doctoral consortium, so my talk is on AI for public health and conservation. But before I start on that topic, since this is a doctoral consortium, let me start by providing some job alerts to those who might be interested. So at our Circus Center for Research on Computation and Society at Harvard, which I direct, there are postdoc positions that are open with a December 1 deadline for applications. This is for fall 2021. And shown in the background there is our new building where we are all moving into soon. And so hopefully, so Circus will be there as well. So that might be of interest. And then at Google Research India, where I direct the AI for Social Good group, we have in the whole lab, we expect to have positions open of various types, including postdocs and predocs. Hopefully those would also be of interest to attendees. All right, so my group has been focused on using AI for public health and conservation and public safety and security for the past 15 years or so. The key problem we focus on across all of these areas is how to optimize our limited intervention resources when interacting with other agents. Concretely, in the area of public health, the challenge is that we have large population to serve and limited number of social workers or public health resources. A concrete example is work that we've been doing with youth experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles, harnessing the social networks of the youth. We are able to show that our influence maximization algorithms are far more effective in spreading HIV information compared to traditional approaches, leading to reduction in HIV risk behaviors. The technical areas I'll focus on here are social networks and bandit algorithms. With respect to conservation, we have large conservation areas to protect limited number of ranger resources. Concrete example is work we've been doing in Uganda and Cambodia. Harnessing past poaching data, we are able to predict where poachers may set traps or snares, and for the past several years have been able to remove a large number of snares. The technical area I'll focus on here is green security games, which combines game theory and machine learning. For the past many years, we have also been working in public safety with contributions in Stackelberg security games, a model that's in use by security agencies such as the US Federal Air Marshal Service to assign air marshals to flights, or providing patrolling recommendations for the US Coast Guard and others, but I'll not discuss that today. In Google Bangalore, we have been working with nonprofits in public health and conservation in areas of maternal and child care, human-wildlife conflict. Given the limited time, I'll highlight one of the projects from the work there. So in all of the different projects, you'll see three common themes that cut across. First, the use of multi-agent systems reasoning, such as social networks and game theory. Second, the data to deployment pipelines. So we start with immersion in the domain to understand the kind of data that are available to the nonprofits, the kind of problems that are of interest to them. Following that, a predictive model makes predictions of which of the cases are high risk versus low risk. But given the resource limitations, we can't intervene in all of the high risk cases, and therefore a prescriptive algorithm, multi-agent systems algorithm, comes in to recommend which cases to actually intervene on. A field test and deployment component comes last. This is important to understand what are the limitations of our models or algorithms and improve upon them based on the actual field tests. But more importantly, we are here focused on AI for social impact. Social impact is a first-class citizen. It's a key objective of the work. If we don't achieve it, then it's really not AI for social impact. So, and the third common theme here that you'll see is interdisciplinary partnerships. All of the work I'll describe has been going on with nonprofits around the world, whether it's homeless shelters in Los Angeles, such as A Safe Place for Youth, My Friend's Place, or nonprofits in India, such as Arman, that I will highlight. So it's in service of these nonprofits in order to assist them in their work that all of our work is very much inspired by the problems that they face. So I'll talk about public health and then conservation. I'll cover papers from 2017 to now in AMAS, AAA, IHCA, and other conferences. I'll highlight the role of the key PhD student and postdoc who led the work by having their pictures in the top right-hand corner. So we'll start with this problem of information dissemination and behavior change in social networks. I'll use this example of preventing HIV amongst homeless youth. 6,000 youth who experience homelessness sleep on the streets in Los Angeles every night. The rates of HIV among these youth are 10 times the rates of the normal house populations. So homeless shelters try to run information campaigns to spread information about HIV. They do so by recruiting key peer leaders. The idea is that we cannot go and talk to every one of the 6,000 youth. So we recruit key peer leaders, educate them about HIV risks. And the peer leaders will talk to their friends, and their friends will talk to their friends, and information will spread in the social network in this fashion. This is real face-to-face interaction. This is not via Facebook and so forth, because those kinds of media are not available to the population that we're talking about. This is the classic problem of influence maximization in social networks in computer science. Given a social network graph G, we choose a set of peer leaders K, and to maximize the expected number of influenced nodes. We assume that information spreads via this independent cascade model. When we recruit a peer leader, the peer leader will talk to their friend will talk to their friend, information will cascade through the network. When we apply these problems to public health, influence maximization into public health, there are three key challenges that come up that we must address. First, there's uncertainty in propagation probability over edges, and I'll explain that. Second, it's a multi-step dynamic policy that we have to come up with. We can't recruit all of the peer leaders all at once. There are peer leaders who are no-shows, and so what we end up with is a multi-step dynamic policy. And third, the social network itself is not known, but we can have a limited query budget to try to uncover portions of the network. I'll address these challenges in a sequence, starting with the first challenge, assuming the social network is known, and then finally we'll end up with the approach of how to handle unknown social networks. So let's look at how influence maximization works in normal circumstances, what's assumed in computer science. We assume that when we educate, let's say, a youth C about HIV risk behaviors, an adjacent youth D gets informed about these risks with a known probability, let's say 0.4. But immersion in this domain illustrated to us that these probabilities are really difficult to know. And so we can model this uncertainty by saying it's sampled from a distribution. Unfortunately, we may not even know the mean of the distribution, and so therefore we can model that as lying within some kind of an interval. So we are faced with this problem of influence maximization under uncertainty, robust influence maximization. And we solve this problem as a game against nature. So our algorithm is trying hard to come up with the best peer leaders possible to spread information. And nature is trying to choose parameter settings to cause our algorithm to perform as worse as possible. So we are guarding against the worst case. This is a max-min strategy. We are trying to maximize the outcome, whereas nature is trying to minimize the payoff that we get. Here, the reward or the payoff is measured in terms of a ratio of the outcome, in terms of information spread based on our choice of peer leaders, to the optimal possible for the adversarial choice of parameters that nature has selected. So we want to do get the best possible results under worst possible circumstances set by nature. So to concretely, if you think about this game, along the rows are the strategies, the policies that are available to the influencer. The influencer may select one set of peer leaders, and nature has strategies along the columns. Nature is trying to choose parameter settings to cause our algorithm to perform as worse as possible. This is a zero-sum game. However, there's a very large number of policies available to the influencers. If you imagine a network of 300 nodes, and we are choosing something like 30 peer leaders, that's 300 choose 30, already a very big number. Nature is, of course, choosing parameter settings from a continuous interval. And so again, a very, very large number of possibilities. How do we solve such massive scale games? This is done by a double oracle approach. So we start with initializing the game with a small number of policies for the influencer, small number of strategies for nature, and then solve the game. And then influencer oracle provides the next, a best response, the next best policy to add. And nature's oracle will then provide its best response, the next best set of parameters to add into the game. And the game grows in this fashion. We iterate until convergence. And what's interesting is that we can converge with a very small increase in the number of strategies. So we only expand a very, very small fraction of the number of policies and strategies. And with this small game, we converge, and we can show that we converge with approximation guarantees. The second challenge I mentioned is multi-step policies. We start with a social network. We want to recruit, let's say, 20 youth, but we can't bring them all in because our homeless shelter has capacity limits. So we may only be able to bring in 4 at a time. Unfortunately, these are youth under difficult circumstances. One of them may not have the bus fare to come to the shelter. They may send in their friend. Another one may get arrested on their way. And so we may end up with 3 different youth compared to the 4 we asked to show up as peer leaders. And so what this means is when we recruit the next 4, we have to take into account who showed up in the first time step. Furthermore, the state of the network itself is not known. So this is planning under uncertainty. This can be solved as a POMDP, a partially observable Markov decision problem. We are going to choose a set of peer leaders. We get some observations as to who showed up, and then we choose the next set of peer leaders with uncertainty over the state of the network. Solving POMDPs to come up with such policies is difficult, and to solve the computational difficulty, to address the computational difficulty, one of the ideas is to partition the POMDP, because in the real world, these homeless youth their network has structure. Youth who hang out on the Venice Beach together, youth who may be playing basketball together. They're sub-communities that are closely connected. And so by partitioning this network, we can get smaller scale POMDPs to solve this problem in an easier fashion. Now, so far, we had assumed that we've known the whole social network. But in reality, as I discussed, we don't know that. And you can certainly send out social workers to homeless shelters, and they can spend days trying to figure out the social network by doing querying and field observations, but that's a very costly process. Could we sample a small fraction of the network, like 20%, and based on that, figure out who are the peer leaders? Because that would enormously simplify our task. And so the problem here is, given a set of input nodes, number of nodes, such as all the youth who visit a homeless shelter, we can query up to some query budget, let's say 20% of those youth, and then output a set of K peer leaders to spread influence, such that the performance of this choice of K peer leaders is similar to what we would get out of opt, which is the best influence spread possible if you knew the full network. So the way we solve this sampling algorithm is we sample nodes randomly, estimate sizes of the communities that these nodes belong to, and then choose seeds from these largest K communities. And we can show again that there are performance guarantees that are feasible from such sampling. So at this point, I have talked to you about 3 challenges and solutions: network sampling, a robust policy to handle uncertainty, and a multi-step policy. So we constructed this overall system. I'll call it sampling healer to emphasize the fact that it is sampling the network, doesn't have knowledge of the full network. And it's going to select a set of peer leaders, and then based on who showed up in the first round, select the next set of peer leaders. So the first step was to do a pilot test with 230 homeless youth. So we selected 60 under 4 separate conditions. One was sampling healer. The network is not known. We're going to sample the network. Second, healer, which is full network is known. We select 60 youth in that condition. There's a different variety of healer with, again, about 60. And then degree centrality. This is the traditional approach, the baseline approach. We're going to select basically youth who are most popular, one with the highest degree in the network. Under each of those 4 conditions, we selected 12 peer leaders. And then based on these 12 peer leaders were based on the recommendations of the algorithms. And then in each case, our social workers gave them identical training to educate them about HIV prevention, expecting the youth to talk to their friends and their friends to talk to their friends. And then after a month, we want to observe how many of the non-peer leaders, those who we did not educate, got informed about HIV. So after a month, here's the results. If we look at degree centrality, the more traditional approach, only about 25% of the non-peer leaders got informed about HIV. When we look at Healer and Healer Plus, our 2 algorithms, which knew the full network and then did influence maximization, 70% of the youth got informed about HIV. So clearly these influence maximization algorithms are far more effective than our traditional approaches. But look at the sampling algorithm. It is actually doing just as well as knowing the full network. It is actually doing slightly better, but that's just could be a small variation due to the experimental conditions. But as such, the sampling healer seems to be doing really well in terms of informing the non-peer leaders. So that's the algorithm we wanted to test in a larger scale experiment. Now, our collaborators, our colleagues in social work are most interested not just in terms of information spread, but actual change in behavior. And that's the focus of the bigger study. So this is a study with 750 youth. This is in collaboration with Professor Eric Rice in social work. As far as we know, the first large-scale application of influence maximization for public health, conducted in collaboration with 3 homeless shelters in Los Angeles. And again, we recruited people under 3 arms: sampling, healer, degree centrality, the traditional baseline of bringing in the most popular youth, and no intervention at all. And then after running these algorithms and educating the youth, we looked at what were the result after a month and then after 3 months as to change in behavior. And what we notice is that with the sampling healer at the end of a month, there was a more than 30% reduction in condomless anal sex, which is one of the HIV risk behaviors. And you can see that there are no changes in the degree centrality and the control arms. At the end of 3 months, degree centrality has begun to catch up, but still is not as good as sampling healer. Now, the fact that our algorithm was able to reach youth and cause changes in behavior faster is important because first is HIV risk behavior, so we want the message to spread faster. Secondly, because it's a community where youth come and go, having this information spread out faster and seeing these behaviors change faster is also important for that reason. We looked at other behaviors, condomless vaginal sex, and again, we can see that the sampling healer at the end of 3 months has performed better than the other conditions. This is clearly showing promise of this approach in terms of reducing HIV risk behaviors, and our collaborators were clearly appreciative of this result.
A way to kind of like marry this tech world with this social service world, like, and how we can kind of go deeper and impact young people and elevate them.
If this group became a really big thing, it could really help out a lot of youth.
So more recent work has started to look at using reinforcement learning to accomplish the same task. In simulation, this is performed better than our handcrafted algorithm, and testing this in the field is one of the next approaches. Very interesting and active area of work. Besides HIV prevention, there are other challenges in public health that we can tackle using social networks. One of the challenges we've looked at is suicide prevention, which is a challenge amongst youth experiencing homelessness, but also a challenge on college campuses. The basic idea there is to recruit gatekeepers who can keep an eye out on their peers. So you can think of this as a graph covering problem. The gatekeepers we select so that the entire population is covered. And by keeping an eye out, we mean, a youth might say something like, sometimes I feel like sleeping and not getting up. That would then cause the gatekeeper to recommend a counselor to talk to the youth, for example. However, not all gatekeepers we recruit might show up for training. And so what we may end up with is a robust graph covering problem. Ensure graph covering even if some of the covering nodes, the gatekeepers, are not functioning. When we looked at the latest algorithms in this area of robust graph covering, what we notice is that we're trying to maximize worst case coverage, but now there is disparity in coverage across different racial groups. So to ensure that we reduce this disparity, we have to look at fair and robust graph covering among gatekeepers. So this is a topic of our NeurIPS 2019 paper. And we've looked at approaches such as max-min fairness, maximizing the minimum coverage across all groups, as well as diversity constraints, which is an approach inspired from cooperative game theory, specifically the notion of a core. This is very much a continued and active area of work that cuts across all of our applications using social networks. So at this point, let me switch over to health program adherence. And I'm going to appeal here to the work that we've been doing in India with Google Research India, looking at maternal and child care. The situation is difficult in that a woman dies in childbirth there every 15 minutes. 4 out of 10 children are too thin or short. And so there are nonprofits. The one that we're very lucky to work with, have been doing some inspiring work, is called Arman. Works with 18 million women who are enrolled with 160,000 health workers. And they have this one program called M-Mitra, Mobile Friend. Basically, it's a weekly call, maybe 2 calls a week, to new or expectant moms. It's a friendly 3-minute message in the local language, in the voice of the local health worker. Something like, you are in the 3rd week of pregnancy. You should start taking these kinds of health supplements. Your child is 3 months old. Enroll in this government program. And Arman has shown that in randomized control trials, there are significant benefits that are seen for women who listen to all of their messages. They have up to 2.2 million women who are enrolled in their program. One of the challenges they face, though, is that unfortunately, after registration, some of the women, in fact, a significant fraction, may become low listeners or drop out of the program entirely. Now, Arman could, after the women drop out, go back to the women and say, hey, please, come back and try to get them back into M-Mitra. But obviously, that means time is lost. Could we, ahead of time, predict who's going to drop out so that Arman can focus their intervention on those women before they drop out and ensure health of the baby is protected? So here's how the problem works. You have woman number 1, beneficiary number 1, who does, so these are automated phone calls going from Arman to these women, does not pick up the phone in the first week, but does pick up the phone in week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5. Woman number 2 picks up the phone on week 1, week 2, but not in week 3, yes on week 4, not in week 5, and so on and so on. You can imagine hundreds of thousands of women of this type. Now, it turns out that in this case, women 2 and 4 dropped out of the program later on. And Arman could go to them after they drop out, which, as I said, is problematic. Could we predict, based on just the phone call listening pattern, that woman number 2 and 4 are at the risk of drop-off, so that Arman could start intervening on them, send health workers to their home, for example, or do a live call and say, please stay in the program, try to retain them in the program. So that's what we did. Initial approach using neural networks for prediction worked out well with extensive past data. But last fall, we then did a pilot with 18,000 beneficiaries. We predicted who are at high risk of drop-off and then tested them on the real data from January to April. And we found that our call precision F1 scores were all above 0.8, which was very encouraging. And this has led this AI program now to be delivered to Arman. It's deployed, helping 300,000 beneficiaries in M-Mitra. And Arman is intervening on these women, and we see them being recruited back, retained back in the program, hopefully assisting the lives of health of the mother and babies. This work was done in collaboration with IIT Madras with Professor Ravindran. Another similar area of work is retention of patients for tuberculosis. Despite COVID, tuberculosis continues to be a massive challenge. Tuberculosis is responsible for 500,000 deaths per year in India, 3 million are infected, and it's a global crisis. One of the challenges is non-adherence to TB treatment. Patients are supposed to take their medicine for 6 months, but sometimes they'll drop off, just like what we saw in Arman. Now here, the calls come from the patients back to the health center. So they do this by, behind the pill pack, the blister pack, every time the patient opens the pill, you can see there's a randomized phone number. It's randomized, so the patient doesn't know it in advance. And the patient, every time they take the pill, are supposed to call the phone number to let the health center know, I've taken my pill for today. So in this way, we can track who's taking their medicine and who's not. And again, if somebody doesn't call for a few days, then the health workers would know that this person is falling behind and go to their home and say, hey, why are you not taking your medicine? But of course, this would mean that we intervene after the patient missed doses. Could we intervene before that by predicting who's at a risk of drop-off? And so that's what we've done, predict adherence from phone call patterns, so based on who's calling, who's not calling. And we've shown in collaboration with Everwell, another nonprofit active in India, that with 15,000 patients and 1.5 million phone calls, that our prediction rate is higher than their simple rule-based approach in terms of true positives and false positives. And this is work that we are now going through IRB to ensure that we can integrate it in the software in Mumbai so that we can actually help them retain more patients in the TB adherence program. So far, I've talked to you about predicting who's at risk. Now let's talk about trying to prescribe interventions. As we discussed, we can't intervene on all of the high-risk patients. So imagine a health worker has 100 high-risk patients. She can't intervene on all of them. And now she has to choose who to call. So this is our NeurIPS 2020 paper. So basically, she may say, okay, I'm going to call the first 3 patients. So given large number of patients, I'm going to call the first 3 patients, ask them, have you taken your medicine? 2 of them say yes, 1 of them says no. She encourages them then to take their medicine for the next day. Then she has to decide who to call the next day. So she calls some other 3 patients. Again, 2 of them say yes, 1 of them says no. And then she has to choose who to call the next day. And you can imagine this goes on because there's 180 days for one single patient, 180 days that they have to complete for TB medication. Now, today, this work is done by the health worker choosing to call in a round-robin fashion. First 10, then the next 10, then the next 10. The task for us is, can we do a better job recommending who to call to ensure even higher level of adherence? And this we do by adherence restless bandits, an approach that's based on bandit algorithms. Some of you may be familiar with this idea of restless multi-arm bandits. Essentially, our adherence restless bandits are a special case of these. So essentially, you can think of each arm of the bandit as a patient in a binary latent state. Either the patient is adhering or not adhering. And now, for the sake of this paper, we've assumed that we know the probability of transitioning from not adhering to adhering and so forth. More recent submissions have looked at not knowing these probabilities. So when we have no observation about a patient, all we can guess is the probability of adherence. We have a belief in the probability of basically a belief about adherence of this particular patient. So here's 2 situations. When the arm is not played, when the health worker doesn't call the patient, then she has a certain belief before calling, and the next day when she has not called, generally speaking, the belief will go down. The probability of adherence, we believe, has gone down. When you call the patient, you get an observation of what happened last night. Did they take the medicine or not? And based on that, we reach a new belief state. If they had taken the medicine, our belief that they'll adhere goes higher. If they had not taken the medicine, we encourage them, so it's a little bit higher, but in general, we have a lower belief that they'll continue to adhere. So based on these kinds of actions that are possible, our goal is to come up with a policy, who to call every day. This can be solved using a gigantic POMDP, but that's inefficient. Instead, we appeal to this idea of Whittle index in these restless bandits. Essentially, Whittle index is a way of providing performance guarantees, and it requires that our adherence restless bandits be indexable. And our theorem shows that these are indexable if threshold policies are optimal. And so what's a threshold policy? Imagine that we have these different days. On day 1, we call the patient. We get some information that the patient had adhered or not, and we have a certain belief the next day. Then we don't call the patient. Our belief that the patient is adhering goes down. We don't call, and it goes down further, and at some point it goes below a threshold, and then we call again. And so we wait for the belief to go down below. We call, wait for the belief to go down below threshold, call again. So that's a threshold policy. And if threshold policies are optimal, I mean, as you can see in the theorem, This optimality of the threshold policies is important, and this allows us to develop a fast algorithm. In comparison to baselines, we can show that our algorithm is faster. So it's blue is shown in blue, and the baseline is shown in orange. And so you can see that our algorithm is faster without giving up very much at all in terms of solution quality. So this is allowing us to use restless bandits in order to provide recommendations to health workers as to who to call every day. I'll very quickly turn to COVID-19 agent-based modeling. So our PNAS paper in 2020 looks at agent-based modeling for spread of COVID-19. And so this COVID-19 dynamics work, it models families, comorbidities, age, testing, contact tracing, and so on. And it got some attention in the news media when the work came out. But our attempt was to actually use it for providing more accurate testing policies. So there's a range of tests entering the market, as you know, with varying sensitivities and costs. And the question is, should we go for quantity or quality? For example, there's the PCR gold standard, highly sensitive test that detects very low viral concentrations, but it costs a lot and has a longer turnaround time. Antigen strip, something which is less sensitive, can't detect viral concentrations at the same level as the gold standard, less sensitive, but also cheap and fast turnaround. So if we are at Harvard and we want to test all our undergraduates, should we be going for the more sensitive or the less sensitive test? And so if we compare, and if we can do the tests at the same level, 3 days each, let's say, and we get back the results very quickly, then indeed the more sensitive test is the way to go. However, so the tests work basically by testing the student or whatever population, and then whoever is tested positive, we isolate. That's kind of the idea. But because the more sensitive test may have a slower turnaround, there may be a day's delay in getting back the result. With that 1 day delay, suddenly the effectiveness of the more sensitive test drops. And so what this means is the number of infections go much higher if we have a more sensitive test, but there's just 1 day delay in getting back the result. So less sensitive tests are better for that reason. Furthermore, because of the cost, we may only be able to run the more sensitive tests every 5 days instead of every 3 days for the less sensitive tests. Again, the number of infections rise, and so the impact of the more sensitive tests is lost. So what's the conclusion? Test sensitivity is secondary to turnaround time and frequency for COVID-19 surveillance, which is the title of our paper. And so what this means is go for the less sensitive rapid tests rather than trying to keep everybody in PCR. So this work was referenced by the World Health Organization in providing guidance on diagnostic testing. It's been covered in various news media, New York Times, etc., allowing our EPI collaborators to advocate to the FDA and CDC that this is the way to go around the nation, although this has clearly not happened and has been frustrating. So let me, in the last 10 minutes of my presentation, talk about conservation. And I'll go through this quickly to ensure that I finish in 10 minutes, and I look forward to your questions. So when we talk about conservation, we are trying to protect large conservation areas that are protected by limited numbers of rangers. Wonderful, wonderful wildlife. I've been to some of these national parks, but there's threats to the wildlife, traps that are set by poachers around the park, thousands of traps every year to try and maim and kill these beautiful animals. And so the rangers have to walk these parks trying to look for these traps. And you can imagine how difficult it must be. And so our job is to provide patrolling recommendations to the rangers. So you can imagine something like the Queen Elizabeth National Park in Uganda. We divide this up into 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid square. And each grid square then is a target. And so the higher the animal density, because if you imagine that there's water body, the more the snares, and it's a more valuable target for the poachers. So this problem can be cast as a Stackelberg security game. For those who may not be familiar with this model, essentially it's a game where the rangers patrol first. So they'll patrol in a randomized fashion different areas. The adversary gets to conduct surveillance because they can see where the rangers are and then choose to set snares in locations in response to where the rangers are patrolling. So previous work in stackable security games has often relied on highly strategic, rational adversaries. In this case, we are faced with boundedly rational poachers. We are trying to learn their adversary response at each target eye based on past poaching data. So essentially, we have 14 years of data about where rangers have set their snares. You can imagine thousands and thousands of square kilometers of the park, and the rangers only set snares in some parts of the park. So we have to predict where the rangers will be setting these snares based on distance to roads and rivers and villages at each grid square, area habitat, area slope, etc. We have ranger patrol frequency, and we have, of course, whether in the past snares were set in this grid square or not. There's a lot of uncertainty in observations here in terms of where we find snares and not. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip how we actually addressed all of this and say that there is an ensemble model that can be used to make these predictions. So we built such a system, and the first real life test of this was in Queen Elizabeth National Park, where we predicted 2 9 square kilometer areas that were infrequently patrolled. That means for the past several years, rangers had not gone into these areas much. And we are telling them that you go there and you're going to find a snare. And this happened to be 1 month before a conference deadline, meaning if rangers find snares in these places, we will be able to write a paper. If not, there's not going to be any paper. And so the rangers went out. Every day they would email. Initially, they found nothing. Then they found a poached elephant with its tusks cut off. So so we were too late for this elephant, but clearly the machine learning system was guiding us to be in the right place. Then we found a whole elephant snare roll and removed it. So poachers were active in the area. They were killing elephants, but before they could kill the next set of elephants, we were able to remove this elephant snare roll, thus potentially saving lives of elephants. Then a whole set of antelope snares were removed. So this pilot test was successful, and now it was time to run a larger scale test, which we did in 3 national parks, Queen Elizabeth and Murchison Falls in Uganda, Shripok Wildlife Sanctuary in Cambodia. Here, in each case, we indicated 24 areas each. We identified them. Some we designated as high risk, more snares will be found. Some we designated as low risk, lower number of snares would be found. And rangers were asked to patrol to find snares in these areas. And after 6 months of trials in each of these parks, where we predicted high risk, more snares were found. Where we predicted low risk, less number of snares were found. This was repeated in all of the parks. In fact, as you can see these pictures from Cambodia, the numbers of snares that were captured in 2019 were more than 5-fold how many snares were captured in 2018. So far I've talked to you about prediction, but there's also prescription, where to patrol based on what was predicted. Now, in the past, this was done in a 2-stage manner, meaning first you predict, try to get the machine learning to work as accurately as possible, and then you plan your patrol separately. However, really the patrol finds that some targets are more important. And so we really don't need to distinguish between targets where very little number of snares are found very accurately. And so what this means is we have to take a more end-to-end learning approach, meaning when we learn, we take into account what we're ultimately trying to do, which is to patrol these parks. And so the loss function is no longer just accuracy, but actual defender expected utility. And we can show that, and this requires us basically to pass gradients back, not only from just the prediction component, but from the prescription component. And we can show that this leads to higher performance. I know I'm rushing a little bit, but let me get to the last point I want to talk about, which is work we've done with Spot. So this is basically work with an NGO called Air Shepherd. They fly drones in South Africa. They basically try to identify poachers late at night. They have a infrared video. The infrared video comes to a van where there's a human being looking at these pictures late at night, trying to see, is there a poacher from this infrared video? And you can see this black and white grainy videos. It's very hard to detect where there is a poacher. So we've built this system called Spot to automatically detect these poachers and animals and delivered it to Air Shepherd for use. So the way this is supposed to work is that the drone will fly overhead, find poachers, alert rangers to come in. However, we don't have rangers everywhere. That means the probability the rangers may arrive may only be 0.3. Poachers may not be stopped. So what do? Our collaborators, Air Shepherd, do deception. So they'll turn on the lights late at night of the drone and fly towards the poachers. And they've shown that poachers will run away. But if you always engage in such deception by turning on the light when there are no rangers and fly towards the poachers to say rangers are on their way, the poachers will obviously figure this out. And so we need to be strategic in our deceptive signaling. And this strategic signaling, optimal deceptive signaling, Stackelberg games, was work that was done by Haifeng Xu and carried on recently with Elizabeth Bundy. And so basically, you got drones who know the mixed strategy, whether the ranger or the probability of rangers being present or not, and poachers who know those probabilities. But the drone knows actually if the ranger is present or not. And when the ranger is present, the drone is going to honestly signal to the poachers that yes, there is a ranger present. But when the ranger is not present, deceptively it is going to signal with some probability that a ranger is present. And these probabilities are adjusted just so that the poachers may know that they're being deceived. They know the probabilities with which these signals are coming, but it's still in their interest to believe the signal and run away. And so even if they know there's a 50% chance of defender deception, they'll continue to run away. So this computing these optimal defender commitment is NP hard, but we've come up with algorithms to come up with these deceptive strategies. So I'm going to end by saying that the PAUSE system, which was the system used for predicting where poachers set traps or snares, has gone global. We've now integrated PAUSE with SMART, which is this platform that is run by a collaboration of all of these wildlife conservation agencies. And it is now available for download by rangers worldwide. And so we hope that this will soon be used in 800 national parks around the globe. And so this is very exciting in terms of the kinds of possibilities, in terms of amounts of data and so forth. So I'll end here by talking about some of the lessons that we have learned from all of this work in applying AI for social impact. First, it is possible to simultaneously advance AI research and achieve social impact. Secondly, we have to take a data to deployment perspective and not just focus on improving algorithms. It's important to step out of the lab and into the field, to embrace interdisciplinary work, whether with social workers or with conservation scientists. And you'll see the lack of data in many of these applications. This is the norm, it's a feature, and it must be part of the project strategy. And finally, the evaluation emphasis needs to be inclusive of actual deployments in the field and evaluation of these field deployments, and not obsessively focused just on whether we improved the algorithm to get some 10% more out of it or not. So I'll stop here and take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Professor Milantambi. That was a really great talk. Anyone in the audience as panelists, please send your questions through the chat. And for the attendees that we have today, please send your questions in the Q&A feature. So I'll give it a couple minutes for people to type their questions here. And if not, we can get started with a question that I have. So back to the first project that you were talking about with public health and influence maximization, I was curious if you guys had looked at or what your thoughts were in terms of public health misinformation on Twitter or other social media applications, and how you could apply the work that you've done with POMDPs in that area via social media.
No, that's a great question. In terms of social networks, the first paper that we wrote about applying some of this work in social networks was actually about information campaigns. And this was very much, in that case, it was very much in context of what's going on in places like Afghanistan in terms of, the Taliban versus other, the allied forces being there, and information and disinformation campaigns and so forth. And so we are very interested in applying game theoretic approaches where it's not just in the case that I mentioned, it was very much us spreading information about HIV prevention. But you could imagine applying it in a competitive context where we are trying to spread good information and someone else is trying to spread misinformation. And so that's something that we're familiar with. We haven't addressed that in the context of COVID, but that would certainly be something very interesting for us to look at. Thank you for that question.
Of course. We have a couple other questions in the chat. So from Aruna, the first problem for HIV prevention in homeless communities, the baseline was degree centrality. Have you considered replacing real gatekeepers with synthetic gatekeepers for higher coverage?
One second, sorry. I just wanted to clarify that the question was in two parts, but I wanted to ask if, you mentioned that the baseline was degree centrality, right? In this, in this problem. And I was curious if, you had spent some time like just understanding the structures of the communities and if there was sort of a latent influence structure already in the communities, and if you had considered also other kinds of centralities, like for example the eigenvector centrality is better, it better understands the influence in the community, right? So I'm curious if you had considered some of those things.
Yes, no, that's a wonderful question. So in the simulation work that we've done in the papers and so forth, you'll see other kinds of baselines that are considered. For actual implementation, actual sort of clinical trial in the field, we had to limit the number of baselines. So we chose the one that was used by the communities, the shelters, so that we could show that that particular baseline which is in use is outperformed by our algorithm. But you can certainly see, I mean, I totally understand the point. And at least in simulation, those are the baselines which were not as good. Because you can see here, there's a lot of complications. The fact that the social network is not known, that you're coming up with a dynamic policy rather than one-shot choice of peer leaders. And so the problem becomes more complex because of that.
Thank you.
Awesome. We have another question regarding the first set of results you presented. Is the reason that the healer method works better than degree centrality because it includes multiple learning steps of whom to target, or is it because it targets influencers whose edges are less correlated with each other?
I'm not sure I followed. I was trying to read. Is it in the chat window or is it something?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, I can. This is Nick. I was the one who posed that question. Sorry, I can try to restate. And
yeah.
I acknowledge that I don't know all the methods behind influence maximization. But I'm just curious. Maybe if you can give a bit more intuition as to why, what's different about the healer approach that really allows you to get these more robust results compared to degree centrality.
That's an excellent question. So my collaborator Eric Rice points out, maybe this intuition might be of some help. That it's like trying to use the high school football team to spread information in the high school versus getting the breakfast club. So basically, it's like when you use our approach, it sort of goes into different sub-communities and pulls out people from different sub-communities to try to spread information. Whereas when you look at degree centrality, what gets selected are most popular youth in the community. And they all hang out with each other and they can spread information to each other. But that's not as useful because then you're not getting to strategic points in the network. So we want some of those strategic nodes who may be able to influence far reaches of the network rather than just recruit from the center of the network, because if you recruit a couple from that place, you've already got the network covered. So recruiting even more people does not help in order to spread the message far and wide. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Thanks very much. That's very interesting.
Awesome. And Aruna, do you want to ask your next question that you have?
Yeah, I have two more questions, Professor Tambe. So one of them was, in the suicide prevention problem, when you were looking at social networks and, you were particularly looking at identifying these gatekeepers who were like the centers of influence who could then reach out to people, right? I was curious if you considered, having synthetic gatekeepers. So, for example, this would cover like a larger portion of the social network, and maybe it doesn't work on a push model where the gatekeeper reaches out to the person, but it works on a pull model. So somebody would reach out to this gatekeeper, and then the request is forwarded. Did you consider like simulating some of these things, or yeah,
No,
framing it this way?
that's a fascinating idea of having these kinds of synthetic agents, chatbots, if you will. So in my class, in one of the projects that was done, people had built these synthetic chatbots for people to ask questions related to sexual and reproductive questions that they wanted to ask anonymously, and that was shown to be quite useful. So I can imagine something along those lines could be of some use. We haven't tried it. It's an interesting suggestion, and I'll try and follow up on that in terms of. But that's something we haven't. We certainly have not worked with.
Okay. Sounds good. And I think one of my last questions was just, in the problem of the health workers, where in the Matra and the Arman problem, I was curious if, so one of the things is, I was working on just building some tools for to help communities organize better. And one of the things is just like, how can you help the community self-organize, right? So, like if for some reason like Arman goes out of the picture, like can you create ways for the communities to self-organize? And I was curious if you had considered trying out your prediction algorithms to identify beneficiaries who could potentially become influencers in the future.
That's again a very interesting thought. I guess we've certainly thought about beneficiaries who, if we influence, would influence others. So, for example, if you, really persuade them to be retained in the program, to not drop out, that they will then influence their friends or people in their own neighborhood to say, don't drop out of the program. But we haven't solved the problem. It's something actually, so in one of the slides in terms of future work to be done. So it would be a very interesting extension to the, for example, to our NeurIPS 20 paper, where instead of one person, being influenced, just like only one person being influenced, if you say everybody brings their own social network to the table. So if you influence some people, you not only get them, but maybe there's some probability that some of their friends will also come along and be retained in the program. So that would be something, this is a very interesting extension and something obviously of great importance. So thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. And thanks for doing all of this amazing work.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. Before I start, it's really an exemplary work that we just saw. And I'm particularly a fan of this slide that is on the screen, which says everything about the goal that a CompSust researcher should have. So particularly, it's not a technical question, but the question is, for all the works that you presented, you have some field component where you go and actually try to see it being deployed somewhere. So how has your experience been discussing with people who work on the field, and how do you get how do you get all of your research to be deployed in a field? How do you manage all those things?
That's a very important question, Hari. And for those, since some of you may be very interested in these topics, I highly recommend really getting out of the lab into the field, talking to the field organizations, whether it's in your own city or abroad. It's important to understand what problems genuinely are being faced so that we can really assist them in their work. And so our motivation really is trying to understand these problems in the field and then trying to assist. And the experience has just been fantastic in terms of the inspiration you get talking to these people, these frontline workers, whether they're rangers in the field, in places like Cambodia. I mean, these are people who are putting their lives on the line for preserving biodiversity for the rest of us. Or TB workers in Mumbai. I mean, you sort of ask them, aren't you afraid of getting tuberculosis yourself when you go and talk to the patients about continuing on taking the medicine? And I mean, it is some kind of courage to really do this kind of work. And so I find it very inspiring to be working with these folks. And also it leads to new ideas, new challenges that we wouldn't think of if we were sitting in the lab. So I guess the short answer is it's really for us, not something, it's not like an afterthought. It's something that I would say is the first thing we should do, is to go talk to these folks, try and understand what problems they face. And as I said, I mean, really, if I may offer some advice, it's like this is really going to change how you approach research and make it more fun, more inspiring. And of course, if you get involved in something like conservation, the side benefit is that you get to travel to places that you would normally not go to, like Uganda or Bangladesh or Malaysia. So it's not necessarily Hawaii, but very interesting places.
That makes sense. But is your approach while trying to implement something on the field is to collaborate with some NGOs that are working there?
Absolutely. It is always in collaboration with an NGO. I mean, we value that collaboration very much. Our applications are always in service of the tasks they are doing and trying to make it more efficient. In a sense, what are we trying to do? We don't want to be gatekeepers of AI for social good. We don't want to be people who say we have the power of AI and we will selectively give it to some communities who we deem are worthy of this power. This is not the way things should be, right? We want communities to empower themselves and to be able to use this technology as is needed. And sometimes, yes, it is useful, sometimes not. And so that's what we are striving to do. And so this is our attempt to try to get there. So it's always, so it's not this idea, I know none of you approach the problem this way, but it's not this idea that we will first deliver, come up with an idea of a solution, that we want. You have to use reinforcement learning and then go to an NGO and say, hey, you got to use reinforcement learning. Maybe it's not useful to them, right? So the better way, I mean, the way we approach things is to go and ask them, what is the problem? And then try and figure out what solution would be appropriate for their particular situation.
I totally agree with you. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is the first slide that you showed, the one or two slides where you had the job things. I think many of the participants we have right now were not present that time. So it'll be great if you can go back to there and just announce it again.
Sure. Thank you. So let me see if I can, what's the easiest way? I mean, stop sharing. Let me go back, change my slide quickly, and then come back to this, I think. Well, let me just, let's see if I can get there quickly. And all right, so I wanted to say that there are job alerts. First, we have postdoc openings in our Center for Research and Computation in Society. I showed this new office building where we are all moving into. The deadline is December 1. There's a Circus website if you wanted to go and check out the openings. And there's very much topics that would be near and dear to CompSust, AI for public health, AI for conservation, topics of this type, fairness. Google AI, I lead the AI for social good group. We anticipate openings next year, but there are openings in other groups that are already there. And, it's a great place for anybody who's interested in things like cricket. There are cricket nets in case that attracts you, good food, but more importantly, awesome set of colleagues to work with in a lot of different areas. So again, lots of openings now, but also we anticipate next year that there'll be more. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tambe.
Awesome. Thank you for your inspiring talk and all the great work that you were presenting, and thanks for coming to speak to us. Hari, do you mind sharing the screen really quick?
Yes,
We're going to
totally.
start with presentation group 4. We have a great lineups of talks for today, and our first speaker is Priya Danti talking about talking about electricity systems, tackling climate change with machine learning. So Priya, if you'd like to share your screen. And I'll give you a 1-minute warning.
All right, can you see the screen?
Yep, you're good.
Awesome. I guess first of all, I wanted to thank Hari and Caitlin for organizing this event. It's not easy, especially since it moved virtual this time, and I think it's been going really great. So thank you so much for that. So today I'm going to give a talk on some work I did with a ton of collaborators, basically trying to identify ways in which machine learning can be used with high leverage to tackle climate change. This talk will be relatively high level, for which I apologize in advance. I'll also try to hint at some of the technical concepts that I'm personally working on in the meantime. And if you want to reach out and talk more in depth about those at any point, please feel free to do that. All right. So I don't necessarily need to justify to this audience that climate change is a huge deal. It is having increasingly severe effects in terms of storms, droughts, fires, flooding, etc., in many, many parts of the world. And in particular, these impacts are being felt disproportionately by the world's most disadvantaged populations. And the other issue is that as we have some amount of climate change happening, we tend to get more climate change happening. So in particular, things like as permafrost melts, we have less sunlight reflected back into the atmosphere, which exacerbates warming effects. And so all of these things sort of underscore the need to act quickly to tackle climate change. In particular, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in a special report on how we sort of limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, has said that we need net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So at that point, we cannot be basically putting any new greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere that we're not offsetting, but I guess taking back out of the atmosphere through, for example, carbon dioxide removal. And that's really very ambitious, especially considering that emissions are in general still increasing year after year. There has been a bit of a dip in that increase with COVID, but unfortunately, it is expected that afterwards, some of these effects will rebound and we'll continue to see emissions growth. And that it could be actually worse than before, given various policy decisions that have been made to try to sort of alleviate economic strains of COVID-19, but that may have consequences for climate change and some of the infrastructure that we've put in place to tackle climate change. So definitely still a lot to do here. And it's something that I think should really be at the very forefront of a lot of our minds. So tackling climate change can take sort of a couple of different forms. And in particular, I think it's important to note that climate change is not, in some sense, an on or off switch. We do need to act quickly, but a lot of people will sort of ask, is there a last day by which it doesn't make sense to tackle climate change anymore where we're doomed? And the answer to that is no. That in some sense, every action that we take today to reduce greenhouse gas emissions will make the future less worse. And we still also have the ability to prepare for a future that is going to sort of start to see some of the consequences that we've already started to see. So in particular, the two aspects here are mitigation, so reducing greenhouse gas emissions by doing things like decarbonizing electricity systems, or by reducing the emissions that we see from forestry and land use. And adaptation, building resilience to the consequences of climate change around the world through both technical solutions and through sort of community and capacity measures, things like making sure governments are equipped to sort of implement various kinds of strategies at the local level, for example. And so a lot of us here come from a computer science and even more over the years of the DC, a machine learning background. And so then there's often this question of how exactly can we use our particular skills to help tackle climate change? And I think the answer to that is honestly very multifold. We can, for example, use the tools that we know how to use, things like machine learning, in order to help tackle climate change. we can use our knowledge as technical researchers to, for example, help facilitate technology policy and other, to sort of scale up and kind of enable various forms of technological development that will be needed to tackle climate change. And we also have the ability to use our networks, right? We are often part of universities, we are part of companies, and these entities actually often play very large parts in policy debates. They have voices that are often paid attention to in these kinds of arenas. And so sort of through our position as technologists, we're actually afforded quite a bit of power in society that we really should be leveraging to drive policy forward. So there is really a very multifaceted aspect in how we as computer scientists and machine learners of sorts can really help tackle climate change. But as I mentioned, one of those is through the development of machine learning tools. And so focusing in on that aspect, a big group of us wrote a paper called Tackling Climate Change with Machine Learning, basically trying to provide some kind of overview for the ways that machine learning as a tool could be used in this particular area, both in terms of how it could plug into different sectors and in terms of high-level themes that kind of emerged across those different sectors. And so in particular, we explored a lot of different areas from, electricity systems and buildings and transportation, where you can kind of reduce the emissions associated with the kind of energy use, to things like agriculture and forestry, where you see a lot of emissions being produced because of the ways in which we use land. And then we also looked at, industry is another place where we would want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then we also looked at climate change adaptation, both how can we come up with better climate models that allow us to take more actionable decisions, or that provide actionable insights that allow us to take better decisions. And then also we looked at climate change adaptation in a sort of variety of areas, including, trying to build up ecological awareness and prevent biodiversity loss. How do you build resilient infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So I particularly have an attachment to the electricity systems part of this paper. That's the part I wrote. And so this is the sort of figure for that part of the paper that is sort of zoomed in on. And in particular, in this part of the paper, I sort of talk about the fact that in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the electricity sector, we'll need to do two things fundamentally. One of which is moving towards low carbon electricity sources more quickly. So that's things like solar and wind and nuclear. And then the second big thing we'll have to do is, in the meantime, given that that transition isn't going to happen overnight, we need to make our existing systems more efficient and less emitting in the ways that we can. And so that involves things like when it comes to integrating new sources of renewable energy or low carbon electricity sources, you need to do things like forecast how much solar power you're going to have on the system, or optimize your power system more quickly in order to accommodate the fact that you will have solar and wind power changing from hour to hour. Or you want to, for example, accelerate the discovery of things like next generation batteries, or solar fuels, liquid fuels produced from the power of the sun, that will allow us to manage the system more efficiently in that scenario. So that's sort of one aspect. And then in terms of how do you make the existing system more efficient, sort of as we make that transition, there are lots of questions around how do you do things like forecast the emissions on the power system at any given time in order to enable the optimization of the system, so that, for example, if I have an industrial cooler, I can try to run that cooler at a time that has fewer emissions impacts, as opposed to when it would have more emissions impacts. So there are lots of applications in this area, and for those who are interested, I'd encourage you to check out the paper or the interactive summary that we actually put together of the paper. But I wanted to sort of explore some kind of high-level cross-cutting themes that have kind of emerged throughout the paper, both in this section and in the other sections, that can hopefully help kind of provide a framework for thinking about what machine learning can do. But I think also importantly, since a lot of us work with various stakeholders, for communicating to those stakeholders who may not be sure what machine learning can do, what the capabilities really are. So one of these, of course, is forecasting. In a lot of climate change areas, there's really a need to proactively plan and schedule something or the other, because we of course don't know the future always in advance. And so machine learning can help make predictions using time series data, using video data, kind of really incorporating very heterogeneous sources of data in order to make future predictions. So I already sort of motivated this in the electricity sector in the sense that since power system operators need to balance the amount of electricity supply on the power system with the amount of electricity demand exactly at any given time, there becomes a need to sort of understand to sort of alleviate the uncertainty in our understanding of, how much solar and wind power there's going to be in the future by doing things like creating short-term forecasts or nowcasts of solar and wind power. But forecasting comes up in a lot of other contexts too. Things like for adaptation, trying to understand in the future, what does agricultural yield look like? Are there going to be famines? And as a result, what can we do about that as a society? And likewise, predicting hurricanes and other extreme events in order to help with evacuation planning and so forth. When I sort of started getting into the CompSust net circuit, and I was talking to Carla Gomes, who was helping me figure out where I should do my PhD, she definitely advised me and said, look, when you're developing a method, it actually often can have benefits across multiple application domains. And this is something that you should be thinking about. So if you're working in something like forecasting and you're applying it to a problem like nowcasting in electricity systems, there are certain technical challenges that come up that you have to solve. But those particular technical challenges may be applicable to other areas as well. And so that's something you should be looking out for to sort of see if your method, when sort of adapted a couple of steps to different domains, can sort of have an outsized impact. So this is why I think sort of this kind of characterization can actually be really important when thinking about the capabilities of machine learning. So forecasting is one sort of area of impact in climate change domains. Another is accelerating complex models. So there are a lot of places in climate change where we have some kind of physical model that we need to run. For example, a climate model or a power scheduling model that is really, really slow. And that actually impedes us from making decisions. For a climate model, if you want to make localized decisions, you often can't do that because the models are too expensive to run. Or for power system models, as we have to optimize them more and more often based on renewables, they are again often too expensive to run to do that adequately. And so machine learning can do things like approximate the output of time-intensive simulations or otherwise sort of integrate with these kinds of physical models in order to leverage both data and physical insights that we have. So these include applications like speeding up electricity scheduling. You can do things like predict whether the constraints of an electricity system optimization model are going to be satisfied, and that can help simplify the optimization of that model. You can do things like try to actually use a neural network to approximate the entire electricity system model, but incorporate knowledge of power system physics into that neural network so that the neural network is still fast, but actually respects the physical constraints of the network. And this is an area I work in particular, sort of how do you incorporate power system physics into neural networks in a differentiable way. So feel free to reach out to me if you want to learn more about that. I also believe Aaron Ferber's talk in the next presentation block will sort of deal with methodologically similar concepts, though in a different context. And then, yes, this application of downscaling power of climate models is sort of an application outside of electricity systems where we would want to, for example, take a climate model that's run at a very large scale and sort of downsize it, downsample it into a smaller scale in order to give more actionable insights. So that's two themes so far: forecasting, accelerating complex models. A third theme is remote sensing. So there are many situations in which on-the-ground data does not exist. And yet having that data would allow decision makers to sort of take more informed, more data-driven insights on climate change. And so machine learning can help sort of extract insights from satellite imagery or aerial imagery or on-the-ground sensors, for example, in order to sort of provide estimates for various quantities where we don't actually have this on-the-ground data. So some examples include tracking greenhouse gas emissions, things like methane. For instance, in natural gas pipelines, we have methane that sort of leaks from these pipelines as it's moved from where it's extracted to natural gas generators, and this is really bad because methane is something like 40 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. And so there's been a lot of work to use hyperspectral satellite imagery, for example, to try to track methane emissions. And there are lots of other applications here, things like trying to characterize the energy efficiency characteristics of buildings in order to inform building policy, pinpointing deforestation in order to help with enforcement action, and evaluating the risk of flooding by coming up with better elevation maps.
1 minute warning.
Thank you. I will run through the rest of these. And then the last of this is accelerated experimentation. So searching through large spaces of materials and molecules, for example, to try to understand which experiments would be the most fruitful to try. Some examples here include trying to develop better next generation batteries or solar fuels, which is actually some work that has been done under the CompSust umbrella by others who are not me, as well as creating better construction materials and things like sorbents, chemical sponges for carbon capture. So the kind of last thing I want to talk about is some important considerations for doing work in this area, which sort of maybe mirrors some of the themes that Milind talked about. Okay, so one of them is that machine learning is not a silver bullet. It is not applicable everywhere. I really want to mirror what Milind said about you can't just, for example, decide that you're going to use RL and then go into an organization and tell them, I want to use RL for you. I think it's really important to sort of understand where these methods are applicable and when they are, to understand that they're only going to be one part of the strategy. For instance, to decarbonize buildings, you can create smart buildings that interact with the grid, but if those buildings aren't insulated, you're actually losing a lot of impact there. So really understanding what piece ML plays, if anything at all. A lot of impactful solutions are often not flashy. There are applications in areas like nuclear fusion, for example, that are really, really cool. But sometimes things like predictive maintenance, just making sure parts of the power grid don't break, can be important as well. When you're doing work in this area, I would say that it's really important to understand not just what your algorithm is doing, but how that plays into the larger system and the life cycle impacts of that. For example, if I kind of do something in the transportation area to make transportation more efficient, for example, self-driving vehicles are an example of this, will that cause them to be used more? Will that actually increase emissions more? These are the kinds of things that you definitely want to be thinking about and be working with domain experts to try to understand not just what is the sort of limited impact of my application, but what is the overall impact here. As a result, your work definitely needs to be driven by collaborations with other experts in other areas, by the end users of your model, but then also, and I think this is something that's often missed, by affected communities, not just the people you would implement this with, but the people who would be affected by a particular application. And then the last thing is that it's worth noting that machine learning is a tool, and like other tools, machine learning can be applied in negative ways. And so as a result, this is something we should be thinking about in our work and when we're communicating about machine learning to stakeholders, that it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, but it's only as good as how it's used. And we built an initiative called Climate Change AI that you should totally check out if you're interested in joining the conversation. So sorry to go over, Caitlin, and thank you so much, everyone, for listening.
No worries. It was a great talk, Priya. Thank you for speaking. Our next talk is Genevieve. So if you want to share your screen, Genevieve, we can get started.
Yeah, great. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yep.
Great. All right, so I'm actually going to be talking about a kind of one of the specific areas that Priya called out. And I think, so online learning for climate forecasting, or how can we improve based on the models that exist in the machine learning community and in the numerical physics community, how can we predict our ability to do kind of climate and weather forecasting? I'm a PhD candidate at MIT in CSAIL, and I'm also have a joint appointment in the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. I'm advised by John Fisher and Nick Roy at CSAIL, but this is work I did at Microsoft Research this summer with Lester Mackey and Judah Cohen, who's a meteorologist. And so the challenge about 2 years ago, some experts in the machine learning and the weather forecasting communities came to Judah and Lester, and they said, you know, how could you use, quote, broadly machine learning to improve the state of subseasonal weather forecasting? And so what is subseasonal weather forecasting? It's kind of a range that we don't think about very much, I would say, as day users of weather forecasts. So it's predicting the spatial distribution of variables like temperature and precipitation 2 to 6 weeks out. So this kind of very midterm range. And it's a really underserved area in the forecasting community. So meteorologists will tell you that the weather forecasting from 0 to 10 days is a solved problem. I mean, I think we know day to day that that's not always the case, but on 0 to 10 days, we can have pretty good predictive skill. On the other hand, super long-term forecasts, so predicting decadal averages within climate models is actually something that the meteorology community has also made a lot of progress in. Because you're kind of predicting these long-term averages over a full decade, you benefit from a lot of kind of smoothness in the data. And this midterm range is really a sweet spot that's incredibly hard. You have to deal with the chaos of weather systems, and we still want kind of accuracy over short time periods. However, it's a super important area. We should care about it a lot because 2 to 6 weeks out, being able to say whether it's hotter or colder or will rain more or less than average allows us to do things like extreme event prediction. If you can predict droughts ahead of time, you can think about predicting forest fires, doing intelligent crop planting, irrigation scheduling. A lot of renewable energy resources like solar rely on this idea. Is it going to be sunnier than average? How much solar energy will be available? And so this is a range that we care about a lot, and we're really terrible currently, kind of both the numerical models and the machine learning models at making good predictions. And so for 2 years, Lester and our team has been working on kind of developing different machine learning models that fit in this space and kind of combinations of machine learning and physics-based models. So I wanted to just introduce you to 4 of them. And they kind of represent the full spectrum of the way that you might model this data. So we have simple models like the day of the year model that just makes a prediction for a specific grid cell of like a windowed average of historical data at that location. On the full other end of the complexity spectrum, we have kind of an augmented numerical physics model, CFSV2, which discretizes the Navier-Stokes equations in the atmosphere and runs them forward in time. So this is a full physics-based dynamical model. We've tried things like neural network-based models using sea surface temperatures. This is our salient model. And we've tried kind of even more complicated but traditional statistical models. So local linear regression, where we throw in every feature that we think might possibly be predictive for this problem, and then prune based on this local target loss. And so we've developed all of these different models. They have different strengths and weaknesses. And the question that I kind of was asked to address was, for anytime you're making a forecast, all of these different models make a prediction. And which one should you submit? Which one should you trust at any given date? And this is a hard problem because the performance of our models looks something like this. So this is a plot of RMSE of a bunch of different models that we have over a year-long period in 2019. And so this is RMSE, so lower is better, higher is worse. And we see things like this, where this is our salient neural network-based model. And for this, this month-long period in April, salient was by far the best model. It had lower RMSE than any other model. And you could imagine if you had some submission strategy where you submit salient during that period, you'd start to trust it a lot. And then almost immediately afterwards, you see a big peak in RMSE. And so we wanted to think about how could we do this adaptive submission strategy in a way that kind of avoided getting too confident about salient during these regions when it does well.
1 minute warning.
Great. So the approach we took is it's an online learning algorithm called online learning with expert advice. So at each round, we're trying to choose this W vector, which is a weight vector, which specifies a convex combination of the D different forecasts output by our experts. We'll combine them together just in a convex combination and output that combination forecast. And the question is really, how can we learn a good W that will do well with respect to this metric called regret, which just measures how well did our adaptive forecasting mechanism do compared to the best possible forecaster that we could have chosen with the full knowledge time. Oh, sorry, did I just lose my slides? Yeah. Okay, well, I'll just finish up quickly then. Small technical fiasco. But we did a lot of work in this space. It's kind of upcoming submission to ICML, but we looked at how do you do online learning for subseasonal forecasting, dealing with delayed feedback, thinking about adaptive learning rates so you can do well, not just asymptotically, but over finite time periods. We came up with new regret bounds in this domain. And we really think there's a ton of ways of applying online learning methods to kind of do better, stable weather forecasting, extreme event forecasting in this domain. So I'd be really excited to talk if people have work in this space. Thank you.
Awesome. And I forgot to mention this for Priya's talk as well, but if anybody has any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask Priya or Genevieve any questions before we move on.
I have a quick question.
Sorry.
Hey, Genevieve. One of the things I was thinking about was if, so for example, like meteorological predictions happen more than once a day, right? At least the available predictions. Whereas satellite imagery for the same days is only available like once or once a day, like if you look at open data sets. So, is there a way to go from meteorological predictions to satellite imagery um, production from that?
So try to produce kind of higher resolution or higher temporal resolution satellite imagery from these forecast models. Is that the question you're
Yeah,
asking? Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I imagine there would be. I'm not sure if people have tried that. So the data, I mean, I think one of the cool things about data in this space, and the hard things, is that all the data for these big numerical weather forecasts and atmospheric data, global sea surface temperature, it's all available publicly. Like NOAA and other US and global institutions put it out online. But I think it's kind of something that we're going to do as part of this project is make a big release of this huge global data set, because it's in all these different disparate sources and it's hard to use. And I think that, yeah, once all that data is in one place, thinking about trying to answer questions like that would be possible. But I don't know anyone who's tried that, Aruna. I think that would be really interesting. So maybe stay tuned. I think we're going to make a release of this subseasonal forecasting data set soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. So let's move on to the next talk by Ben Rockland. If you want to go ahead and share your screen, then we'll get started.
Sure thing. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep, great.
Awesome. So thank you, Caitlin and Hari, for giving me the opportunity to present today. My name is Benjamin Rockland. I'm currently a master's student at Stanford University, and today I'll be talking about sustainable claim matching for fact checkers, a work I did in conjunction with IQT Labs during my internship. So for our motivation, basically every day there are billions of different social media posts that are posted and read. And many of these posts contain mis and disinformation that spreads very, very quickly. And additionally, many of these posts are really just variants of each other. They have the same core information, but their delivery method is different. So the above is very unsustainable for fact checkers. They simply cannot keep up with the flood of posts that are coming their way. So you may be asking, is there an easy solution? And as it turns out, there is an artificial intelligence and more specifically, natural language processing. So for our data sets, we began with the Google Fact Check API. We pulled about 2,425 fact-checked articles related to coronavirus. Additionally, from the repository shown on the right, we hydrated over 100 million tweets related to coronavirus. Finally, we are also currently building a data set of 100 claims by 100 matches. We're going to be using this for fine-tuning and formal evaluation. So for our model, we basically start by defining two data sets. One is the search set and another is the candidate set. And our overall goal is for each item in the search set, we want to find the closest matches in the candidate set. So for this, we use SBERT. As an example here, we've picked Twitter to be the search set and Google Fact Check API to be the candidate set. We pass each item in the search set into the SBERT model along with all of the sentences from the candidate set. We pass them each through a BERT layer and a pooling layer to produce two sentence embeddings. And then to figure out how similar they are, we use cosine difference. And scores of 0 tend to indicate that they're very similar, and scores of 1 tend to indicate that they're very different. So now for some examples of some outputs. So here we've chosen Twitter to be the search set, and we've chosen Google API to be the candidate set. So the tweet that we want to find matches for is at the top, doesn't COVID-19 mean Chinese originated virus in December of 2019? And as we can see, the top matches we found in the candidate set, for example, our COVID-19 stands for China outbreak virus in December 19. The acronym COVID in COVID-19 stands for Chinese originated viral infectious disease, so on and so forth. And as you can see, the top match is ranked a little bit better because it explicitly mentions the December of 2019 bit. We can also do this in the reverse direction. So here's an example where we match from the Google API to tweets. And the subject here is going to be just on COVID-19 tracking using COVID sensors by Apple and Google. And as we can see in the examples, they're all very closely matched to the top claim here as well. And so an interesting thing that we found as a general benchmark is that scores beneath 0.4 tend to indicate good matches, and scores above 0.5 tend to indicate relatively poor matches. So as I mentioned before, we are using pre-trained weights for our models. So these are different weights that we tried along with their reported scores from the repository authors. And we ended up going with the distill use weights. So the top two are monolingual. They only work on English data. The bottom two work for English and Korean data. And the distill use weights actually work for all the languages in the bottom left. So it's a nice little bonus. And on top of that, we found that it worked qualitatively better on our English data. So that is the weights that we went with for now. So for next steps, as I mentioned before, we're currently building a labeled 100 claim by 100 match data set. So we'll be using that to fine tune the provided weights to achieve better performances. Additionally, we're expanding to multilingual data to try and take advantage of our multilingual weights. And finally, obviously, misinformation can come in many forms, such as images. So we're working on making the model work on multimodal data, so it could match things such as memes to claims. Finally, I should mention that our repository is now released in the open source, so feel free to go to that link and check it out at any time. We have actually also provided a data import system, so you can supply any JSON data that you'd like, and it'll be matched very easily with that. And finally, obviously, my internship has concluded, but Nina Lopatina, whose email is listed there, is going to be the contact point for future repository management. So thank you very much. I really hope that this allows claim matching and fact checking to be a more sustainable practice. And thanks again, Caitlin and Hari, for giving me the opportunity to talk.
Of course, thanks, Ben. Great work you have there. Any questions for Benjamin? Also, we have a question in the chat for Genevieve. Nicholas, do you want to say your question?
Sure, yeah, sorry. That was just a follow-up on the work that Genevieve presented. I'm just curious if we have enough data on things like soil moisture balance, like when you mentioned extreme drought. That's where my mind first went to. So I'm wondering how good predictions we can make for that variable.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I can add some more details offline. But I mean, I think most of the models that we have, they're just generic machine learning models that take in features and output predictions for some regressor. So it would be easy to swap something like precipitation for soil moisture. And I think the question would be whether or not the features that we have are rich enough to make predictions of soil moisture. I don't actually know enough about that problem to say definitively yes or no, but I would guess it's kind of like a related problem to predicting precipitation and temperature, and it would be an interesting thing to try. All these global data sets are like, it also depends on the resolution you care about, but they're like 1 latitude by 1 longitude resolution. So I don't think you could do really specific soil moisture easily, but kind of high general areas. I'd love to talk about it more offline, Nick.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks.
Awesome. Let's move on to Ali Raza's talk. If you want to start sharing your screen.
Yes.
Great.
You can see my screen, right? And you can hear me.
Yep.
Wow, okay. I need to go to the start. So hi, everyone. Thank you, Caitlin and Harry, for organizing this whole thing. And thanks for everyone for being here. My name is Ali, and I'll be discussing towards explainable massive passing neural network. The motivation for this work is the rapidly increasing atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide, as shown in the graph below. And just to emphasize, it was 310 parts per million in 1960 and increased to 412 September this year. And it's estimated to reach 500 ppm by 2050. And this increase in atmospheric concentration is leading to climate change and ocean acidification. And thanks to Priya, I don't need to spend time on it, why it's bad, but this concentration is dominated by the burning of fossil fuels. And we are interested in storing carbon dioxide. So one of the possible solutions is to use Maternal organic frameworks, or MOFs. These are nanoporous crystalline structure which can selectively absorb carbon dioxide. And these are claimed as designer material because the building blocks are basically the material linkers and organic nodes, and we can computationally redesign the internal surface to target certain properties. Now, due to the huge amount of available building blocks and post-synthesis tunability, the question is how to navigate this vast design space to find the best structure or crystals. And then also we are interested in finding those substructures of those materials which are responsible for the carbon dioxide absorption, because it will lead us to design rule and chemical intuition for synthesis of those material. So what we did is we converted the whole material into a graphs in which the bonds are the edges and the nodes are labeled with their element type, and use this network to process them. So first of all, we use like a shared network to convert the one hot encoding onto element type to get the element embedding and use it as a hidden representation. And then we do multiple iterations of message passing. And during each iteration, we get the information for a node from its neighbors and convert it into an aggregated message. And then use that in the gated recurrent unit to update the hidden representation, and we do it iteratively. After the first iteration, a node gets information about its immediate neighbor. But as we do more and more iterations of this message passing, a node gets to know about the local bonding environment, which is like a t distance from its. So after this message passing, we get a node level representation, and then we need a readout function to get the graph level representation. Normally, it's common to use min, max, average, or summation to get the graph level representation, but we used an attention mechanism, because the underlying assumption is this attention will give us some kind of explainability, and it will give us some kind of like a notion of contribution of the nodes for the predictions. So we linearly transform the node level representation and then use a softmax to get the contribution of these, to get the graph level representation. And then after that, we use another network to get the prediction from this graph level representation. So these are some of the quantitative results. Our main focus was on getting mean absolute deviation, and 0.616 is not bad, it's actually really good. And then we also experimented with different sparsity mechanism, because we wanted to recognize only the most relevant substructure for explainability. And for that, we use sparse-max instead of soft-max. It's really doing the extreme sparsity, like 94% of the score is cut off, and our accuracy didn't get a hit. But there is no way to tune this sparsity in sparse-max. So we also experimented with including the attention score in our loss function. For that, we use quasi-norm L 0.5 in our loss function, and lambda is basically factor which we can tune for our sparsity. And as you can see, as we increase lambda and we focus more on the sparsity, our accuracy gets a hit, but it will allow us to identify the most relevant substructure.
1 minute warning.
After that, we highlighted the elements according to that attention to identify the substructure. As you can see here, like after going through the soft max, most of the oxygen elements are responsible in the structure for carbon dioxide absorption. But if we look at the sparse max, it identifies zinc element as the most relevant for carbon dioxide absorption. So this, after going through scores of this structure, we didn't find any like common chemical pattern or any intuition about these. And this led us to believe that the attention is not as meaningful explanation as we hoped for. And we can chalk up to the two reasons. First, we are using the score to get the graph level representation from the node level representation, but it doesn't correspond to the prediction itself. And also because we are using the message passing network, so the presentation of each of these nodes is kind of like diluted. These are like kind of a hot spot. So we're working on reconfiguring our MPNN using some other approaches to get better explanation. And these are our research team that worked on us. And thank you so much.
Thank you. So we'll take any questions for this chat. And if there are no questions, then we'll have our break to start our next tutorial, tutorial 2. The break is actually going to consist of moving to the tutorial room, which I just sent in the chat. So Sarah Beery will be giving a tutorial on building models for static sensors, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And this tutorial requires us to be in a Zoom room instead of a Zoom webinar. So go ahead to that link, pop over there, try to get there before 12:45 so we can get started on time.
If you enjoyed the bird sounds and bird videos yesterday with Sarah's presentation, so the same Sarah will do this tutorial. So I think it'll be exciting. So we'll see you there in the Zoom room.
Okay, Hari, I'm going to